Welcome to IASbaba's IMP Current Affairs session. In this session, we'll be having the international relations session by a retired IFS officer, uh, Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, sir. A small introduction about him. He began his service to the country in the distinguished IFS service. He has served in various missions starting from countries like Ivory Coast, Bangladesh, Mongolia, USA, Russia, Sweden, Nigeria, Libya, and Jordan. He is also a distinguished fellow in Vivekananda International Foundation, and he is a postgraduate in physics from Agra University. Sir has also worked as deputy chief of mission in the rank of ambassador to Russia in the embassy of India, Moscow. Sir is also an All India Management Association and Delhi Management Association member. He is also an honorary member of International Trade Council in Brussels. So this is in short. I can go on and on, but I don't want to waste his time. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sinath. It's a pleasure actually to discuss some of the issues that are current and could be of some importance for the aspirants of the Indian civil services. As you know, that the current affairs are one of the most important dimensions of all our needs and personalities, and are very often checked during your even during the exam as well as during the interviews. So it is quite important to be current about things. Similarly, foreign policies or international relations are like the Matrushka dolls. You know, if you hear anything about Russia, so there is always intricacies from within. So whenever you are answering a question, something that is very important and an advice to you is that you should be specific. No need to go into very long answers, because very often in that sense, you may encourage them to pose more questions or corner you at something that you have said. Therefore, it is important that whenever you are answering any question, and especially with regard to the foreign policy, try to be little precise as much as you can be with regard to the information that you have. So it is also important for you to read as much as you can. Another thing I would suggest is that if you can find, let's say with regard to any question that we discuss, you must do a little more research, because I'll be a little more general in giving you the overall background and the overview as I consider it. Of course, if you want the official information about these things, you must visit the Indian Foreign Ministry's website called mea.gov.in. There are press release section, there is a statement section, there is an agreement section, and of course, speeches by the ministers and others. Now, that will provide you on various issues a very good, authentic information from the government of India, exactly how it thinks. Not necessarily just go by the newspaper reading, because newspapers have their own way of interpreting, and many of the people only read something and then they try to interpret it the way they think. So the person who's even an academic, so they use in a different way. Whereas when you want to have something on the current affairs, it is important that we refer to the official documents as far as possible. And since a large amount of information is available in the public domain on that Ministry of External Affairs website, I think that you should try to refer as far as the foreign policy matters are concerned. Other things you can use from different other sources also. So I've been asked to talk about certain topics that have been given to me. So let me start firstly with what is exactly happening today in the world. That should give you a little bit of an impact. And then what is happening around in this Russia-Ukraine crisis, because there are 2 or 3 questions pertaining to that. So let me try to just handle that first for you, because it is still a very dynamic situation. Now, overall, when we see after the pandemic or even before that, we had seen that the world has been moving away from the liberal world trading order. which it appears that has run its course. Why? Because we see that the most of the international organizations which came out to regulate the international trade, to regulate the international behavior, whether it was United Nations or whether it was other organizations like World Health Organization or World Trade Organization or the UN, UNICEF, UNDP, and so many other organizations. So we see that they are finding a great limitations. We have already run about 75 years with them. And very often you must be hearing that there is something called P5, Permanent 5, in the UN Security Council, which has 15 members. So out of those 15, these 5 countries, which is Russia, China, US, UK, and France, now they wield the veto power. So whenever any issue which is of direct concern to them causes the whole thing to stop, it is extremely difficult to carry it forward. And there is accusations where unless they are able to resolve those issues, because the question of the third countries are very often discussed and resolved to a great extent, whether the veto wielding power will abstain or whether they will negate the vote. But today, what we are seeing is that in the Security Council, there is a divide, clear divide. And that divide is Russia and China on the one side in the Security Council, and other 3 Western countries led by the US on the other side. So you could see that what we talk about Cold War 2.0 and this is pretty much evident in the day-to-day functioning of the Security Council, even without the Ukraine war, because there is a competition which is called geopolitical. There is a competition which is geoeconomic. And these competitions among the major powers are leading to a very major challenge for the global governance architecture. We have seen that during the pandemic, when the world was fighting, economies were down, the pandemic was there, people were dying, and the vaccines were generated, 5 or 6 vaccines, including the one by India and then the second one. India fortunately became a manufacturing hub for many vaccines, including AstraZeneca of the UK and Sputnik from Russia, as well as our own vaccines. Now, in that sense, you see that most of these countries, Western countries which developed, or the China, Russia, India, there is also a V5, it is called. These are the countries that have developed the vaccines. The others are in the process of doing so now. But then the equitable distribution of the vaccine was always at a question, whether these poor countries will be able to get or will not be able to get. 90% of the world is still waiting for adequate quantities of the vaccines. So India had taken up this task, and in keeping with what policy we call at Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, so our vaccine diplomacy, as we call it, also developed in that regard. And not only vaccine, but before that, India provided a lot of medical supplies, doctors, eye-tech training programs, and the e-training to the health professionals and the workers of various developing countries. And likewise, when the vaccine started, India started providing to a very large number of countries. Now, when this is happening, then obviously we are seeing, and in the global governance domain, that there is a resistance. For example, United States uses its own vaccines. Right? It does not use AstraZeneca vaccine, but it collected a huge quantity of that vaccine and would not diverse it. So when you're using these as a political tool, so to say, and then it becomes a problem again of governance. And then they try to undercut one another, like the Chinese vaccines are not better or not good enough. The Russian vaccine is not good enough. Those are the kind of things. Or for India's Covishield, the WHO will not give the approval for a very long time. Now, these are the kind of things, trade barriers, whenever you are going to talk about trade. So you can cite these as examples that in this kind of situation today, the world is facing a major challenge. And that challenge also becomes far more greater for countries like India. Now, today, what we have come to see, we are seeing a hot war. And this hot war is between Russia and Ukraine on the ground. But you must understand that this is not a war between Russia and Ukraine. This is a war between Russia, led in a certain way, an order, and the USA, leading the West. So this has been a geopolitical contestation. But the tools that are being used to contain Russia, to weaken Russia, are economic tools. So it is also, in that sense, a geo-economic contestation. So you have to see that Russia under President Putin for the last 20 odd years has been trying to do better, is expanding its influence in Middle East, in Africa, in other countries, and has strategic partnerships with the two largest countries population-wise in the world, that is China and India. So this is, and it is always coming in between, even in the Indo-Pacific policy. China does not like the way the Indo-Pacific policy is going on, and therefore it becomes sort of a stumbling block. So China and Russia on that domain are together. On the other hand, India's case also is we are their largest buyers of their arms equipment. They are involved in our nuclear energy projects. They are helping us with the space program of India. I mean, as you know that the first Indian would be sent from them. I mean, for the lunar mission, we are discussing Gaganyaan, as we call it. We are also working with them in cybersecurity, and we are also having our own new areas of development, whether it is in the Far East or in Arctic areas. These are other questions that we'll be covering. But this says that Russia's influence has been increasing. Secondly, Russia is not following exactly the same methodology as the Western countries do. And Russia has a great influence over Western Europe, especially with regard to supplies of its oil and gas, and considers itself as a European nation. Now, when the Soviet Union disintegrated in 1991, then they were given to understand by the Americans, by the Europeans, that there is no expansion of NATO. There will not be any NATO expansion towards Russia or towards Russia's border. So they said that Russia need not worry about its security. And then they included Russia into a NATO council. Actually, very recently, President Putin himself, when he saw that over time, continuously there has been an increase in members. At that time, the NATO used to have 16 members only, and now it's more than 30 members. So every time a member increase means they were closing in into Russia. So its security concerns to that extent are logical. Now somebody will ask the question that if all countries are independent, they are sovereign, then why can't they take their own decisions where they can go? The fact remains is that yes, they can. But at the end of the day, every country has a major issue. So the thing that we see now is that Russia has been asking for some security guarantees that certain countries like Ukraine, like Georgia, like Belarus will remain its natural borders and will not join NATO. And that's when this problem happened. So in 2014, as you know, that again, there was an application and a lot of noise about Ukraine joining the NATO or the European Union started off. Before that, in 2008, same thing had happened in Georgia. So we had seen that Putin had a war there also in Georgia, and the two independent republics there also, like South Ossetia and Abkhazia, were created. And since then, Georgia's nomination to the NATO and others membership has been stalled. But the European and American countries do not want to see a very strong Russia. Because till today, even though Russia militarily may be a little weaker, but it's a nuclear power. It's the largest number of nuclear weapons. It is developing its military technology to a much greater extent. Its economy size may be much less. It's about Italy's size, which is too little, 1/5 of India, 1/10 of China, that kind of comparisons. But at the same time, let us not forget It is the richest country and it is the largest country in the world. So therefore, Russia is critical with its oil and gas supplies, with its diamonds, with its different kind of minerals, rare earths, to the global economies. And therefore, we are looking at this situation, which is evolving. And when the current President Zelensky did not listen to, and at the behest of the Americans and others, and provoked Russia to some extent in the past 8 years, since 2014, when Russia took Crimea and made the two other republics, they were saying that under the Minsk agreements, which means that the greater autonomy to those two Russians are predominant, will be permitted. But that did not happen. The Ukrainians did not have any interest in continuing on that, whether it was on their own or whether it was at the advice and behest of the Western partners, you never know. But the end result was that the Russians were worried about that if Ukraine actually becomes a NATO member, that means on their border, they will have all the NATO forces, missiles, and everything coming on there. And then that will be a greater danger for them, especially as they think, and Russia also, and the US also considers Russia as a strategic rival. So then Russia went in again about 16, 17 days ago, and the Russian forces are fighting basically to liberate the eastern part of Ukraine and to create another natural corridor which they can themselves control. Situation is terrible. 2.5 million people are refugees, which is very bad. We have also seen that casualties are mounting of the civilians, which Russia does not want to, because they consider them same people. The Orthodox Church began from Kiev. That was the seat for that. The first capital of this Russian Empire at the time was in Kharkiv. So there are these areas, and they have historical connect because Russia considers Belarus, Ukraine, and itself as the white Russia completely. And so they identified with them. So there is a cultural connect, there's a civilizational connect, there's a historical connect between them. And that's why any inimical regime which is there, which wants to sever those ties and go towards the West, was not acceptable. Now we can argue on its morality, but at the end of the day, the fact remains that whosoever is a big power will continue and control its environs. It happens everywhere. Now, my 2-cent argument is very simple, that Americans, personally, I feel, have no right to condemn this because they have done exactly the same in Iraq. They have done the same in Libya. They have done the same or helped Saudis do it in Yemen. We have seen what is happening to Iran. So wherever they can get into the troubled waters, they go there and try to enter into a regime change agenda. So now everybody says that Putin will try to remove Zelensky. Precisely, that's what these big powers do. And there are none of them is holier than thou. All of them are in this deep morass, and they can be accused of exactly the same crimes that they are trying to accuse the other side. So today we are seeing the war is intensifying. At the same time, some diplomatic moves are taking place. There have been official level direct talks between Ukraine and Russian officials. Then Turkey mediated, and there was a talk 2 days ago between Russian and Turkish foreign minister. Nothing much came out of it, but this morning President Putin said that some movement has happened. Now Russia has laid out 4 conditions that recognize Crimea as the part of Russia, recognize those 2 independent republics, and that Ukraine will never become a member of the NATO. The one major demand Ukraine has already seemed to have agreed, and that is that their president has said a few days ago that they will not join NATO. Now, this could be because they did not get any real help that they expected, because I believe that Zelensky, who does not have a political experience, so to say, did not understand this game properly and was taken for a ride. And is putting his people into this. Of course, from a patriotic point of view, he's doing the right thing. But you have to see what are your capacities are, to what extent you can expect. Because under the NATO agreement, which they can only have an aggression when they are attacked, one of the NATO countries can attack. Now, today, as of today, Ukraine is not a NATO country. And therefore, the NATO forces cannot come in, nor does NATO want to really take on Russia, because that means that will be leading to a World War III. And Putin has already hinted that he will use everything at his disposal should a third country intervene. So that is not allowed. So now diplomacy is taking place very slowly, gradually, and the Putin is closing in on Kyiv. At the same time, we are seeing a tremendous civilian strife and resistance, which is very unusual. But some of you must read the history, and you must know that in the Second World War and before that, Napoleon's time, Napoleon was defeated in Russia because of the resilience of the Russian people. Similarly, Russia means I'm talking of Ukraine included. Similarly, Hitler lost in Russia because of, again, the resilience of the people and their capacity to take the adversity for a very long period of time. So that is their strength. Now, this is something that I think that the Russians did not factor in, and that's why it is taking longer. Then, apart from the fact that they are trying to reduce the civilian casualties. So, but once the war becomes, when the external forces intervene, then we are going to see a little more increase in this situation. Now, one question was here about India's stance. You have to look at it in a very different context, not what you are reading in the papers, that India is walking a fine line, that India has no options, that India abstained because of XYZ. Of course, we have excellent relations with Russia. It is a it's our special and privileged strategic partner. We are dependent on Russia for about 60-70% of our military equipment. We have very strategic projects together. And Russia stood by India in 1971, whether it is at the UN Security Council. It has always stood with India as far as Kashmir issue was concerned. It has been a partner in our fight against terrorism. And therefore, there is a natural connect between India and Russia and certain dependencies as well. At the same time, with the USA, our relationship in the last decade or so, or I would say 2 decades, has gone up very high. It's very strong relationship. Today, we term it as global comprehensive strategic partnership. We have interoperability in our forces. We are doing training programs because for USA, China had become a major challenge. And in order to contain that aggressive challenge, they created their Indo-Pacific strategy. And in the Indo-Pacific strategy, India becomes a critical pole for the West, especially the United States. And that's when you see the emergence of Quad and other things. Now, the United Nations Security Council, India took a stand which it has always taken. India has said very clearly, if you read, you must read this statement, which is very beautifully drafted and conveys the right messages. For example, when it says that the diplomacy and dialogue should prevail, what's wrong with it? Because at the end of the day, whether it is before war, during the war, or after the war, it is the diplomacy that will end it. The war will never end because in today's age and time, no war has been won. America has lost in Vietnam, it lost in Afghanistan, it lost in Iraq. Soviet Union lost in Afghanistan and wherever they have fought. So this is very difficult to win a war. We have seen what happened in Nagorno-Karabakh. That also you must study recently. So here we are looking at the situation where so India stood for this. Then India also said that the diplomacy was abandoned very fast. That was an accusation not only to Kyiv or to USA, but also to the Russians, that you must have given more time to the diplomacy. When we talk about sovereignty and territorial integrity of every country should be respected, what are we talking about? We are talking about that Ukraine is being invaded. So you have not directly accused the country, but you have clearly mentioned that this is not correct. When we are saying the UN Charter should be respected, this is precisely what we mean. Secondly, we have to also look at it this way, that there is no other option but diplomacy. And India, in this case, had it just taken, let's say, side with the Americans, oh, Russia invaded, what would you have got? Nothing. Another voice added, but today India is in a position where it has a moral authority to ask President Putin and ask President Zelensky to cease violations and cease the hostilities. Stop war, come to the table. This is what Prime Minister Modi has done. So I think we have done, we could do much more, but whatever we have done is good enough. He has been talking to all the leaders. There has been a quad meeting, as you know, virtual meeting, in which again, those countries, 3 countries, Japan, Australia, and US, wanted India to condemn, but India has explained its position very clearly that this is our position because we are not taking a selective approach. Today, if you are going to condemn, you must condemn the Americans for invading Libya, invading Afghanistan, invading this. But, you know, at the moment, this is a situation, and India has always been against any external military intervention. So I think that this has been one of the major policy considerations. Secondly, of course, Indians were involved. So there were 20,000 Indians, students and others who were there. Their evacuation is extremely important from our point of view. So we tried to get them out, and we fortunately got everybody out. If you take sides with one country or the other, you cannot bring out your people because then the other country will create a problem. Today, like eastern part largely controlled by Russia, the western part controlled by Ukraine, what kind of a situation are you looking at? So therefore, I think that this was an excellent, and whenever you argue about it, you must say this vote for India was for peace, for sanity, for diplomacy, for territorial integrity, UN Charter, and for India itself. So that's why this is how you must tackle this question and say rightly it has nothing to do with, of course, national self-interest. National interest is important. It serves no national interest by going one way or the other. And secondly, lastly, you can always say, people will ask you why then India should have done this. We might get this difficulty or that difficulty. Imagine one thing. India is not a banana republic. It is the largest democracy in the world. It is the second largest market, which might become the first. It is the second largest population, 1/6 of the world. It is the fastest growing economy at this stage. Obviously, it will be impacted by this war. And economic impact on the war will be the most difficult for India to handle. And therefore, it is in our interest that the war stops. So what we are doing, and we have to leverage ourselves. So whether the Americans, whether the Russians or the Chinese, anybody who wants to do business with us, have to factor that into account, that India has to be dealt with respect and with dignity. And it's a market. If you want to come and do business with us, let's do it on our terms. So that's something I would say is very important and must be kept in mind when you are. So I've taken a little longer on this question, but this is about 3 questions in your questionnaire that you were given to me. Let me just briefly talk about US withdrawal from Afghanistan. Much has been talked about, but certain dimensions of it you need to understand. You see, USA went into Afghanistan to fight terrorism, to fight Al-Qaeda because they were located there. But at the same time, the US was not able to, and as they themselves admit, were not there for nation building. So they were there as a force. They tried to create an army. They tried to support certain regimes and administrations, but they were not really invested in the country to that extent. And the war went on. And thereafter, 2001, they went there. And in 2003, they went into Iraq. So they were fighting several wars and all were losing wars for them. This continued in the name of fighting against terrorism, but at the same time, as you know, the Iraq invasion led to much greater enhancement of terrorist outfits and the greater terrorism across the world. That happened. Same thing is here. We are seeing the terrorism has hardly been reduced. They will fight about it, but they can claim anything, but that has not really happened. And we are seeing what they have done. Now, they went in 2001 to fight against Taliban, right? And they eventually, then Taliban was removed from their power. Taliban was everywhere. I mean, they had never left the country. They were there. Small wars were taking place here and there. And eventually, the Americans' patience to stay in the conflict zones was reducing. They said, we don't want to fight unnecessary wars. From Obama downwards, everybody tried to come out of these various theaters of war. And then they were looking for a safe exit and they were spent $1 trillion, thousands of troops have died, and uncounted number of Afghans have been killed in this process. So they wanted to leave, and therefore they started talking about it, in which Qatar helped them a great deal, because Qatar opened an office for the Taliban in their capital called Doha. And there they became an interlocutor for the Americans with the Taliban. And eventually, as you know, in 2020, a Doha agreement was signed with Taliban. Various undertakings were taken from them. But the Americans had to leave because it was being an unsustainable war for them. But what has it done? You see, there was a tweet which was going on around, which says that the Americans, after 20 years, removed Taliban and brought back Taliban into power. Now, once you know what Taliban has said, that they are not going to abdicate their philosophy, they will remain what they were. They have a extreme religious philosophy with which they go. They never said that they are going to give it up. So expecting them to change their attitude to women or towards other thing is naive. But since the Americans were in a rush to leave, it is causing a major problem everywhere. Now, problem for India also, it is there, because the Americans left a lot of arms equipment, latest arms equipment with them. And in that process, they made Pakistan a little more stronger. And the relevance of Pakistan continued. So that is also an important point for us to consider. China got very much involved as the vacuum was created in Afghanistan. And they have been hosting the Taliban delegations, looking at the market, looking at the rare earths, which are there, more than $1 billion worth of $1 trillion worth of rare earths that are present in this, looking at the corridors, whether it is China-Pakistan economic corridor, extending it to Central Asia via Afghanistan, or the China has a border with Afghanistan in Xinjiang, and so they want to use that towards Central Asia and other places. So this has become a critical place for them. Likewise, the Russians, who consider Central Asia as their backyard, are interested in Afghanistan. So today, as we see, the Americans have left in a hurry. They did not have proper intelligence, it seems. So they did not know how soon the Taliban would come. Even Taliban were surprised at how quickly they were able to move in and take over. So we are seeing that Afghanistan is infested with terror groups, whether it's Al-Qaeda, whether it is ISIS, or a Taliban hardliner Taliban. But Taliban's philosophy is to have their Islamic emirate within Afghanistan and not outside. On the other hand, the ISIS, which is Daesh, and which was basically decimated in Iraq and Syria, has a global ambition of creating Islamic caliphate. And they are at cross purposes with the Taliban. So there is an internal fight is going on. And Taliban is also not a single grouping. It also has many groups inside, many competing groups. Whether it is Haqqanis, for example, who have been brought up by Pakistani intelligence and Rawalpindi establishment. So they are the ones who are having competition among themselves. So today, situation in Afghanistan is very bad as far as the humanitarian catastrophe is concerned. No country has recognized them as yet. They are beginning to get some assistance. And just very small thing I want to tell you to think about, that there was $9.3 billion of funding, which was available in the American banks, which America froze once they left. And they say if Taliban delivers on such promises, then only we'll start. And eventually they decided to take away $3 billion from that, and said that they will pay it for the people who died during the 9/11 in USA, which is what led them to come to this. Now imagine the predicament. Imagine the hypocrisy of this all. You were there controlling the country for 20 years. Then you did not compensate the people from your own people for that. And now with this country, which is going through tremendous socioeconomic problems and health problems, you cut down their money and just pay out of it. I mean, you can see that the kind of not only hypocrisy is, in Hindi, you can call it dadagiri, that these countries use sometimes. And likewise for Russia, they are using all these financial and economic sanctions to bring it to its knees. So Afghanistan is in a bad shape, but India which had done a lot. We had invested about $3 billion in Afghanistan, all infrastructure projects from their parliament building to dams and high impact projects and all that. We had to leave the country, evacuated all the Indians who were there. At the same time, India has now again started. Personally, I feel a bit late in the day, but we have started providing assistance to them. Food 50,000 tons of wheat has gone there. We have also sent a lot of medicines 3-4 times. And we are working with them, with the Central Asian countries, with the Qatar, with other countries, to how to assist them in stabilizing the country. Because if the country is not stabilized, then you will see a lot of terrorist groups will be coming and we will have a problem on our borders in Kashmir and elsewhere. So this is something about the Afghanistan situation as of today. The Afghan government currently, Taliban government, is looking for recognition, looking for greater assistance, and several countries have provided that on bilateral basis. Another question is AUKUS. Australia, UK, and US. This was a tripartite security agreement, which was signed. Now, just go back a bit, that you must have heard about the Quad. The Quad word in the Indo-Pacific is an instrument and organization which comprises today of 4 countries, which is India, USA, Australia, and Japan. Now, these 4 countries, and Quad initially was meant to be a Quad security dialogue. But all the 3 countries, like Australia, Japan, and USA, consider China as their enemy number 1. They want to contain China through this Quad and Indo-Pacific mechanism in the Indo-Pacific for its aggression and its unilateral claims on territories, problems with India. But India, if you were to read what happened when Prime Minister Modi was in Singapore for the Shangri-La dialogue, he had very clearly identified India's policy. Of course, there should be a free and open Indo-Pacific. There should be international law and international rules, maritime connectivity, freedom to passage. All these should be there. But at the same time, India did not perceive this as against China directly, then or not even now. But at the same time, we are seeing that the Quad collaboration has moved in a direction more strategic and economic in that sense. And we had summits, 3 already happened between them. And so now it is really acquiring the traction. And India's one more point that India was telling the Americans, that by getting involved in this Ukrainian warfare, you are frittering away your energy from the real problem, that is in the Indo-Pacific and China. That has been another point of difference that we had with the Americans on that. So the Americans over time thought that militarily, although we have joint exercises, Malabar and all kinds of exercises we do with one another, but at the same time, we are not taking it into the military technical field, so that, which is what the Americans like. Plus, India does not believe in the system of alliances, and therefore we have tried to keep a low key in that direction. So the Americans came up with this new idea that let us have, with the countries with whom we already have a security partnership and defense agreement, so let's sign with them. So they created this group called AUKUS, and this happened in last year, 15 September 2021, basically to create greater synergies, providing the nuclear-powered submarines to Australia in order to beef up the Australian Royal Navy. So I think that this also, it means they will collaborate more in terms of artificial intelligence, quantum technologies, or the latest, and so that all 3 countries can have the military dimension to it. Others can join, but at the same time. But in this whole thing, what they did was, in the security pact that they have signed, is that the France, which was supposed to provide the submarines to Australia, was not taken into confidence. And therefore, the French, who consider themselves as a major partner in the Indo-Pacific, because they already have several countries and islands which are in the Indo-Pacific, and so they consider themselves a major Indo-Pacific power. Secondly, economically, it was defense-wise, it was a slap on their face. So obviously they were hurt, and they broke off relations, recalled their ambassadors, both from Australia and the USA. And of course, with the USA, President Biden called, and then the ambassadors have been returned. But at the same time, this continues to be a major problem between these two countries. Of course, what France did was to compensate to a great extent for that. They came to Gulf, and with the UAE, they signed an agreement for providing Rafales, as the USA had declined to provide them F-35s. So basically, all these big powers are into this game of providing arms, ammunition. Whenever there is a conflict, you will find that these countries are in a high drive, because that gives them markets and a greater possibility of using their new equipment and discarding their old ones in this process. This is precisely what they are doing now. So this AUKUS will create a security framework, and very much directed against China, obviously. And whether this will be used, because they will be having, they will share technologies, they will share capacities, they will have joint efforts and endeavors and projects in order to do so. It is, of course, taking time. It will take time, because making a submarine, nuclear or otherwise, takes a long time. China, of course, has objected, saying that it is violation of the new non-proliferation treaty because of the nuclear nature of it. But I don't think anybody bothers about it. So both sides are working to increase their own strike capabilities in this. So this is where we are as far as the AUKUS is concerned. France obviously called it as a stab in the back and is very unhappy about it. It is still not, we used to have a trilateral with France, Australia, and India. So in that context, that has not been held, that was called off. And I don't know what will be the future of it until they mend their fences. Another question was the developing country status of China. Now, as we all know, that China has been claiming to be in number one position, to be the second largest economy, and sometimes even media reported that it has already become number one. And when it becomes number one, means it is displacing the United States. That is the major bone of contention between between US and China. But at the same time, in the World Trade Organization, the Chinese claim themselves, because it is for every country can decide what is the status. Of course, it has to be checked and facts have to be given. So it says that I'm a developing country, underdeveloped, least developed country, or a developed country. Now, all those things are basically self-attestation or proclamation. And then the WTO, which is Article 18, I believe, provides for that possibility. So it has been going on there. China claimed that, and that what benefit you get it, because basically what happened is that it's the largest developing country, no doubt, in that sense, but it gives you more time, a certain concessions to deal with various requirements that a developing country has to do. So this is something that China is benefiting from that, and it has been doing it. Similarly, in the area of, let us say, the climate change. So when you have to undertake various responsibilities, in that sense, then you can get longer period of time, and you basically get a negotiable advantage, because in the international trading system, there is something called special and differentiated treatment, and that is given to the developing and underdeveloped or least developed countries in that sense. So, but as you know, the Americans always say, President Trump said that this is misuse of this, and the China is going to have the developed country status by 2023, when it's, it's 78. I think their GDP or per capita income was $150, $160. And it's already crossed 10,000, and it will be more than that and reach the developed world status. So then China does not technically have this. Other countries can question it, and they have been questioning it. Now, India has also faced the same problem. Trump said that when he was he called India as a tariff king, and said that India is unduly benefiting from it. And then they withdrew this GSP, generalized system of preferences, which allowed you market access at concessional prices to that country, or to European Union, or to America, Now that he withdrew that from India in that sense. So we are all, this is a fight that goes on. Of course, if China says I'm economy number one, obviously, logically, it cannot claim to be still a developing country in that sense of the term. There are, of course, poor people. There are, of course, problems there, but that nobody will take into account. And there will be a greater resistance on the part of other countries, because this treatment allows it some non-reciprocal preferential treatment. Means if some country gives you some benefit, you need not give it because you are a developing country. So those kind of safeguard mechanisms have been provided, and I think that this is something which is going to be a major feature in the trade negotiations after some time. Then India-Nepal political map crisis. You see, neighbors are always difficult to deal with because there are always issues. There are boundary issues. There are diaspora issues. There are security issues with all your neighbors. So what India follows the policy is of a non-reciprocal policy. Like whatever we are giving it to you, we are not expecting much in return. What India expects basically is security, that they will not allow terror groups or other inimical countries to operate against India in that sense. And for that, there are a lot of assistance is given, billions of dollars of assistance is provided to them. Their people can, like Nepal, we had a free treaty, people can just walk in wherever, they can work, whatever it is. So it has been considered as, in a way, very, very close, I would not say part, but it's like beti, roti, beti kind of a connection between India and Nepal. But then Nepal has been a kingdom also under the British. At the time, we had seen that there were some treaties, and the geopolitics in the region has also changed, with China coming into the picture, trying to have very close relations with all our neighbors. And that is something that is given a fillip to it. Now, how it all started was that Nepal had come up with many maps all the time. And it has been coming up from this old treaties which the British have signed, or during the East India Company had made certain maps. So they keep on coming up with those maps which India had not recognized, but they never became a major issue between them. But in 2019, if you remember, November, I think we had signed a new map, basically India's political map, after we passed on Article 370 and changed Jammu Kashmir into two states and the Union Territory. And all that time, what happened is that the area of the Kalapani region, as it is called, was shown as part of an Indian district in Uttarakhand. And therefore, it's called Pithoragarh. Right. So in Pithoragarh district, it was shown there. Now, once that came up, then obviously Nepalese started off again, egged by the Chinese, and they started competing, and they just came up with a new, and they always claim that this is our region, and it all belongs to Kali Nadi, the origins of Kali Nadi. The Indians say something, the Nepalese will say something else, and they have been shifting the trends and how the river, but for India, it has been the natural border in that sense. So this is something, and it is also, that area is essentially between three countries. So it's a trilateral junction. And it is an extremely important, critical and strategic point. And therefore, Nepal being a buffer state for India, obviously India has to take that interest to that. So, but the Nepalese, as they call it, came out with their own map, including other territories as well. And India termed it as something called cartographic aggression. So this is a thing you have to read about, the genesis, about this, the river dimensions, where it is going. It's all available in the public domain. Whether it is originating from a place called Limpiyadura or something like that, or Lipulek Pass, or wherever India says. So this is something that needs to be discussed and sorted out. We have done so with Bangladesh in most of the places. So India has done it. So if we feel that this is basically, if you have good relations with the countries, you can nicely resolve it. But when there is a third country involved and they try to create a confusion, then obviously it becomes a bit difficult, especially when the earlier hydrographers had arbitrarily made certain claims, and those maps are being converted and being used to prove a point that the regions of Kalapani or Lipu Lake or Limpiadura and all that are part of their sovereign territory of Nepal. So this is, they have rejected India's claim, and they refer to the Sugali 1816 treaty all the time. So it's good to be good for you to read all that. And relations are good, then things can be resolved diplomatically. Otherwise, it remains a contentious issue, and we have to do that. Briefly on India-China border tensions and negotiations, you know all this. This is in the public domain, that the Chinese started completing their aggression into India. And we had the Galwan incident about 2 years ago. And that is something that broke the peace, which lasted for about 40 years, odd years. And for the first time, we had the Indian soldiers who died. And there are more than that. Our number more than 28, some people say 45 or so, Chinese had been killed in that. But the China continues to create its infrastructure in that area and much bigger infrastructure in the area. China considers India as a potential threat to its regional power dominance as well as in the international domain, because of India being the largest democracy in the world. And therefore, it tries to contain India within the South Asian ambit and not allow it to go out. That's why it's creating problems within our near neighborhood. And so that's a challenge for India in that sense. But of course, after the war, we, of course, as I said, always diplomacy has to take on. We had meetings with our defense minister, foreign ministers in Moscow, and the Chinese. And since then, we had 15 rounds of meetings on the border between India and China under various mechanisms. And the Chinese foreign minister recently said, of course, nobody agrees because China as such is sitting on Indian territory and we know its designs. But at the same time, for peace, it was decided in 1988 after the visit to Rajiv Gandhi that we can live together, we can work together, and we can discuss our problems of the border or other problems on the region. Of course, China supports Pakistan, uses Pakistan as its proxy against India, supports its terrorist activities occasionally. But at the same time, China also knows that India is a very large market for it. This year, despite our efforts to contain Chinese trade and investments into India, we have exceeded all expectations. More than $100 billion in trade with China was done during this period. So this is something we have seen, and these, as far as US offer of mediation is concerned, it's neither here nor there. Russians tried to bring India and China together on the table, did not intervene or mediate, but in Moscow the meetings were held. And so right now, at the moment, China and US also are at loggerheads with one another, and therefore we are seeing this problem. One question is Joe Biden presidency different from Trump presidency, which is a very important thing because whatever happens in America has an impact on everybody. Now, I would say that the arrival of President Trump on the seat was one of the watershed moments in the history of diplomacy and in the history of USA itself, because he believed in dealing with the issues as a business deal, number one. Number two, in an arbitrary manner. And then he would not use his own colleagues who are intellectuals in the place or the think tanks or the real. So what they tried to do was, he would just tweet whatever he felt and then try to push it down through. So that's why he withdrew from many multilateral organizations. He broke off all deals. He got out of the nuclear deal with Iran, which was with great difficulty, was arrived at in 2015. And we are seeing that this caused a lot of, I would say, trepidation in the world as far as the global world order is concerned and the multilateral institutions. He withdrew from WHO. Imagine at the time of the pandemic, he stymied the World Trade Organization. He said UN Security Council is worthless. He said NATO is. is brain dead, it's of no use, and they are just sucking us up. So virtually creating an uncertainty among his friends and his enemies. So this is something in his time, but this is what Joe Biden tried to. He's a seasoned foreign policy expert, and he said that we'll have a policy called back to basics, but considers China and Russia as its strategic rivals, and that continues that policy. There is no change in that. It is also continuing to work with other countries, with India to some extent. Relationship has been moving on in the same way. So I think that what he has tried to do is that Biden said that all the agreements that we had signed, international agreements, we will abide by them. And that's why the Biden administration tried to undo some things which Trump had done. For example, Trump had closed the Palestinian embassy or the office in Washington, D.C. He said Jerusalem will be the capital of Israel against all the previous agreements. He said that Sinai would be, Golan Heights will be part of Israel. Now, all those things have been, to a great extent, undone. Some are yet to be undone. But the biggest thing that was the Iranian nuclear deal, also called P5+1. Now, this is a nuclear deal which had President Trump, because he thought, along with the Israelis and Saudis and others, that this was an unfair deal, that Iran has an unfair advantage. And then the deal that was arrived at in 2015, after many years, he withdrew from that. And that caused a lot of churn in the Middle East itself, because then Iranians start flexing their muscles, increasing their nuclear enrichment plans, breaching all the conditions that were reached there. And then they had also got a very conservative government in place. And then Biden also changed. Biden said that I would like to revive the deal. And since then, we have seen that 8 rounds have already occurred. And they are nearly reaching there to sign the deal. It was expected during this week or so. But what happened is, in the meantime, this Ukrainian and Russian conflict has happened. Russia, which is a party to the negotiations and was instrumental in getting Iran to the table, said that these sanctions which they have imposed on Russia, the Americans, will not affect Russia's bilateral trade with Iran. Now, they want a written guarantee from all P5, everybody else, all the others, so that it happens. And that's why today it has been paused, as they say, and we'll have to see how it works out. Now, the Yemen War, again, you'll have to read about Houthis, their background. The Houthis are basically more closer to the Shias, and they are now supported by the Iranians. And so this is a larger part of Saudi-Iranian rivalry. You have to see in that. And Yemen is also a very strategic country. It has ports which are very, very strategic. And Saudi Arabia has border with them. And so obviously Saudi Arabia would like to see a regime which is good. And then the Arab Spring, as you must have heard, read about it also, is very important. So the Arab Spring, when it happened, it had removed the big, long-serving autocrats from many countries, from Egypt, from Tunisia, from Libya, from now in Yemen also, Abdullah Saleh. So all these are removed, and at that time, the Saudi Arabia also was very much miffed by the signing of the nuclear deal in 2015. So it marshaled a Sunni alliance of many Sunni countries and launched an attack to show that we are there. And as just for your information, Saudi Arabia is the largest importer of American weapons in the world. And therefore, obviously, it's the biggest economy, it's a big country, and they want to control Yemen, but they have not been. It has been a major problem for them. And they have not been able to. Today, they're looking for dialogue. Now, as far as India is concerned, India has always said what Saudis are saying now. India has said that this has to be resolved through dialogue. Now, dialogue, of course, Oman is helping. Iran has come on the table also with the Saudis. And now they are trying to work on these together. So I don't think there is any direct impact of this war on India-Saudi relations. Of course, you must remember that during the Nizam's time, We had about 1 million Yemenis who were come and worked in his forces. They were fighting. And we have about 1 million Indians who have been living and they got absorbed into the Yemen landscape. So it's very important. We had oil blocks there. We had a lot of trade. This has all been shut down now. So we are having that issue. Another thing is the trade deals, early harvest. Now the new name has been given to that. Is when we say early harvest means the full trade deal is not possible. So let's do something part deal and get going on the thing, because our relationship with XYZ country has become strategic. Now the strategy means economy and trade are an integral part of it. And you may remember that a few years ago, or even last year, we did not sign the RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. And we are reviewing our other FTAs, one with the ASEAN as well, which was signed with great fanfare, because these trade agreements have not served our purpose. You see, why do we sign the trade agreement? We sign the trade agreement, free trade agreement, so that you get a greater market access, assured access. You know the dimensions within which you have to operate in a country, whether it is European Union, whether it is USA, Australia, UK, or any other country. So if that is not serving, then there's no point having a free trade agreement. That is what has been the stand of the government of India. It is reviewing all the trade agreements. But then at the same time, you have these big countries who are looking to India as a major market. So when they're looking to India as a major market, they obviously like to have a free trade deal for their products, in which they have an advantage. India has high tariffs, it's said most of the times. Because of its developing country status, it can have the protection in the market. So these trade deals are there. Now, these are prolonged affairs, you know that. And when it takes very long time because of small items, one item, wines, sometimes cheese, sometimes wheat, sometimes milk, dairy, whatever it is. So these issues can take the negotiations to a very big level. And that's what is currently having with the European Union, with the UK, with the USA, a trade deal. But we have signed one in the fastest time, 88 days, some 880-page agreement with UAE, which is called Comprehensive and Economic Partnership Agreement. India has also become a part of something called Western Quad or Western Quartet, which is UAE, USA, Israel, and India. 4 countries have signed an agreement which will promote trade and investment. And all the other 3 countries like the USA, UAE, and Israel are India's strategic partners in every which way. So the sensitivities of one another, the market share, for example, in India, agriculture sector is very important. So for every deal, we'll have to take care of how much market can we open, what advantages can we get, especially how is it going to work with the Make in India campaign. When we are talking of Atmanirbhar Bharat, will it help us or will it deny us the fruits a little later by reducing our barriers to our market? At the same time, in these developed countries, we have a problem. The problem is of non-tariff barriers, the labor-related, social-related, environmental-related non-tariff barriers, phytosanitary requirements. So all that, they just bring it up against India, Indian products, Indian exporters, and then you keep on fighting this in WTO or elsewhere, wherever you want to. So Australia wants phase reduction with us, and discussions have been held, and the minister was here recently, and they said that we understand India's sensitivities, whether it's dairy products, pharmaceuticals, or something. Another thing that India's economic advantage lies in our services industry, our IT sector. And therefore, if the services are not included or not given, our people cannot travel. There is a travel problem in the European Union with the UK, with other countries. Freely people cannot travel. You must have heard about the USA also. We have this H-1B visa. So this both sides have to do that. So at the moment, I think that our trade is, the ambitions are there. The trade targets with all these countries are on track. The discussions are going on. But we have signed an enhanced trade partnership with UK, with the US, with Australia. Our relationship has really moved forward very strongly. With the USA, they are not very keen at the moment for the mini trade deal or other trade deal. Of course, we continue to discuss into various forum like India-US Trade Forum and others, how to remove the various blocks which are there or the concerns to be addressed between the two countries. So I believe that we are continuing in that, but with the UK, Australia, and US, I guess it will take a little time. Although with Israel, we might see the trade deal, foreign trade agreement, free trade agreement being signed rather quickly. Which one I should now touch upon? One more, and then I think we leave it for the next day. I will, in this connection, same thing, I would like to, there is something called RCEP, should India open up its dairy sector? Now, you know that the dairy sector is like agriculture, is extremely important for us. And because of the cooperatives, India became the largest producer of milk in the world. India imposes about 64% roughly the duties on import of milk and dairy products. Now countries like Australia, countries like New Zealand, Denmark, and all these countries, and the European Union, of course, are surplus in the milk products because their own population is so small. In India, we don't export much because we are ourselves have the huge requirements despite being the largest producer. So we are basically trying to keep the local industry somehow immune from the impact of this. So this is RCEP also, when discussions were going on, this was another major area in which all the Indian organizations which are involved in this raised this issue, and eventually India took it into consideration, apart from many other things. So what we feel is that you have to protect your industry at the same time, you have to make it more competitive. The answer to this is that if by allowing those countries, you are able to get the technology, you are able to get the good best practices in such a way that your own production becomes, production costs are cheaper, they become far more competitive, because you cannot continue to have the same kind of market access in the other countries if you don't allow it to that. So I believe that we have done well. Like Amul, for example, is like a multinational corporation. It can compete with anybody. But then overall, there are small producers who have 2 or 3 milk cows or buffaloes or whatever it is. So we have to take into account. And I think that this is something which has to be done only in consultation with the farmers, with the dairy people. And we have to, then only we can allow. But we are not the only country that doesn't allow. Pakistan imposes 100% duties. Canada is roughly 200 plus percent on all dairy products which come from other countries. So EU also has its non-tariff barriers. I mean, you cannot, if we want to export to EU, we cannot export our milk products to them because they will say your residuals and pesticides are not, limits are exceeded. So I think that this is something, in this we must be cautious what we are trying to achieve, and we must try to be mindful of the global markets. If we want to be an integral part of the global supply chains, value chains, and global markets, obviously you will have to, while protecting your country or your trade, you have to be careful in meeting the international standards. That's very important, because that if you are believing in a global trading regime, then you have to agree to it. But at the same time, as long as you are allowed these preferential, special and preferential trading arrangements, I think we are okay, but we'll have to prepare for it through technology, investments, education of our own people, so that they can become far more competitive. I'll stop here and next 20 minutes, if there are any questions, and then rest of the we can take tomorrow. Mr. Srinath.
Sir.
Yeah, there is I have the questions in the thing. I'll try to answer as many as I can. Well, there's a question where if Hungary and other countries are not allowing inclusion of Ukraine in NATO, then I can say it has to be by consensus. So is NATO issue a valid premise for Russia to invade Ukraine? Well, NATO premise is NATO has expanded. It's a fact. And including Hungary, Poland, Baltic republics, all of them have become members of NATO. And that has always been a concern of Russia because they were given to understand that it will not go there. But when countries next to you, whose borders you and who are critical for you, and the borders are there, and if you have, they become NATO member, even by default, if not by design, then obviously that will be a major challenge for another superpower. So it is a real politic. Reasons may be whatever. But at the same time, now they said that Americans are doing some 15 biolabs, and today the UN Security Council is discussing. The Americans have tried to change the regime there themselves. As you know, in 2014, what happened? So one country, that president did not want to join the European Union, the Maidan Revolution, everything happened. So it is a complex of many factors we decide. But the most important factor is how Russia perceives its security. That is the basic question for their action. And this is precisely what they have done. Can you explain once more the argument? What if people say that joining NATO and strengthening their security is part of sovereignty of a country? Yes. I mean, morally, when you are a sovereign country, you can take whatever decision you want. Do for your country, whatever you do fit, which organization you want to join, whether you want to join NATO, whether you, yeah, perfectly fine. So from an argument perspective, that is true. But from the real politic perspective, you have to see how it is going to be beneficial to you or whether it is bringing you into direct conflict with another power who considers you're joining there as a part of the security. So that is why, while under the international law, morally, and otherwise, any independent and sovereign country can take whatever decision it wants. But then your decisions are always predicated on the international environment in which you are working. Like today, Ukraine is being decimated completely. It's being attacked. It's, so much is happening. So it's been already sent back by many years. And NATO is not there. The European Union, they're just pumping in arms, ammunition, and just some aid and whatnot, and trying to prep up the current leader, President Zelensky, not to the advantage of the people, right? So the country has to, the leadership of the country has to see it. All countries do that. I mean, if we are saying the dialogue and diplomacy is important, sovereignty of every country is important. That's what the UN prescribes. This is what the normal international relations are there. But at the same time, with the same China, which is sitting on a lot of our land, we are still continuing the dialogue and diplomacy. So what Zelensky has told, so that is very important for any country's leadership to think about it, and not for us to justify or deny. They have to take as per their own national interest. And that's what it is. If the national interest lies in joining the NATO, as they thought, and not in getting invaded by Russia, I think that is. But superpowers do it all the time. This is the problem. That's the real politic there. Well, the question about declining soft power of India due to recent abstention of vote, I mean, nothing could be far more misplaced than it. Why is everybody talking? All the Prime Minister Modi has spoken to about 11 countries, heads of governments and leaders, because they understand that India's position is, and I have explained that particular question in long, this thing, why India stands for peace, dialogue, diplomacy. I mean, what is soft power then? Hard power we are seeing already in display in what is happening in Russia. So I don't think so that it is at all impacting on India in that sense. It is definitely for certain countries who are working on it that India has, why India has not done this, what should be done, it should have condemned the Russian aggression and all that. The fact remains is that this is a geopolitics. What kind of a role do you want to play? In my view, if I were to say, I would say that today India should start looking for another grouping of countries, because we will be going into this Cold War after this Ukraine war is over. Russia, China on the other side, and some other countries supporting them, and then Western countries on the other. That definitely we'll see the new financial structures coming up. We'll see the new security architecture coming up. India can become a third pole, can try to create a large number of big countries, rich countries, smaller countries who are looking to become a third pole. So in my view, we should become, I call it as nations for strategic autonomy. And so it should go. So it's not there. Yes, Deepesh, your question is perfectly right. I mean, this the sense of insecurity definitely is there. Yes, NATO. See that performance of NFP amid rising tensions with neighbors like Nepal, Sri Lanka. You see, Nepal's foreign policy is, as I said, is not only bilateral. This is also now being driven by the Chinese factor, because there is a communist government, and then they, obviously they have there are more connections with the Chinese, and China wants to, and I've tried to explain to you that this is what it is trying to do, is contain India, create problems with its neighbors of these fundamental issues like boundaries and all that, which is more difficult to resolve. And that's what India has to be careful. So now Sri Lanka has realized, as you know, as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, it has realized its problems with China about its diplomacy. It has come to India asking for money to pay for its oil supplies, to pay $500 million. India has just given $1 billion, the line of credit India has given to Sri Lanka to bail it out. So its financial condition is so bad that it is defaulting on the debt payments. India is trying to help it. Same thing happened in Maldives. So we are looking at these conditions in that manner, that India has to, China had thick checkbooks, and it's called checkbook diplomacy. It gives you the debts and then eventually takes away your assets. India does not do that. And that is its soft power, again, that it is giving it and investing in the country for its own benefits, for its own development. And I think that is something which needs to be taken into account, and we'll have to do much more in order to counter the Chinese influence in this in our region. They are beginning to see the Chinese game. There is no doubt about it, and Sri Lanka is an example of that. What is the alternative solution to the problem of weakening of international institutions like WTO, WHO? See, the problem is their constitution, and the problem is these powers. So when there is a geopolitics is played out in these countries for their own benefit by these major powers who control the first number one, number two, or something like those powers, then it becomes increasingly difficult for the large number of countries to accrue the benefits from these institutions. They are serving a great purpose, there's no doubt about it. But when it comes to major challenges, they're unable to meet them. We have seen what happened to WHO because of the Chinese interests. We have seen what happened to the UN Security Council when America and the US and Russia are involved directly, or China is involved. So then you cannot pass any resolution, you cannot take any action. So it becomes extremely difficult in that sense. So I believe that there is the problem is not, you see, every organization can only survive if its members want to. This is a constitution, is sum of the whole. So everybody is a member. It's upon the members to make the organization a success, but its instrumentalities are such. Therefore, what is required is reforms. We need reforms in WTO, we need reforms in WHO, we need reforms in the UN Security Council. Countries like India have been claiming their stakes. Germany is wanting to come in, and so is the Brazil and Africa. So we have to work on it in a way so that there is some reform process in the UN is taken care of, both in the procedures and in the composition of the Security Council. Then only you will be able to move it. Well, about the question of unfortunate killing of an Indian student, Naveen, in Ukraine, You see, when we are in the war zone, these things can happen. Fortunately, so far we have been able to take out people from the conflict zones. But the problem, what happens is that the individuals also get very worried and perturbed during these. It's very difficult, the psychological impact to be in that kind of situation, even though the government of India is trying everybody, but from an individual point of view. So they were all advised that not to go outside, stay in the bunkers, try to keep themselves. But if you go out and the crossfire is taking place or some bombs falls, then it is very difficult. Now, you tell me, I mean, I have myself evacuated thousands and thousands of Indians in different conflict zones. What more could any Indian government have done? We are the only country. I mean, you know, the Americans and the Russians, Americans and the Britishers left their people there, citizens, and told them that we cannot evacuate. They're asking us to help them. We brought out Pakistanis, we brought out Bangladeshis, others, even in this time. So I don't think that that is something, that's an unfortunate incident that can happen to anybody. Now that hundreds of Ukrainians are also dying civilians. So in that, anybody, some of the Indians have not left even now. They said, no, we want to stay here. So it happens. When I was trying to evacuate people from Libya, many of our doctors told us that we will not go now. We want to be here. We want to help our Libyan friends. So in that kind of situation, very little the Indian government can do. No, the plurilateral institutions are not detrimental to multilateralism, because the multilateralism, as I said, that lacks a lot of heft at the moment because of the great power politics. And therefore, these organizations, whether it's Quad, whether it's BRICS, whether it is RIC, whether it is trilateral arrangements with different countries, I think that they serve that purpose, limited purpose in that. But they are also permitted under the rules of the World Trade Organizations. For example, European Union, SAARC, and all these organizations, they're allowed to function. And this was agreed and discussed. And it was seen that they're complementary and not contradictory. Why was veto power introduced in UNSC, and is veto an impediment to global security? Yes. You see, what happened is that when the 1945, when the UN was established again, before that was League of Nations, after the First World War. Now the League of Nations did not have any provision for a veto power. But in the 1945, these 5 countries thought that since they were the victors and others were vanquished, that they took upon themselves that in the United Nations United Nations, there is the Security Council, in which there will be X number of countries, but there will be these 5 who will remain permanent members. And if they deemed fit, they can exercise the veto. They have to explain the veto, but they can exercise the veto against any resolution that is brought to it. Then there is the problem is that this veto has become, it has been used umpteen number of times. I mean, we have benefited from it when they were taking Kashmir issue. Soviet Union and then Russia continued to increasingly veto on this. So it does help, and sometimes where the unfair issues are brought to it, likewise in terrorism and other issues. But at the same time, it also, I would not say blanketly that it is impending the global security, but when the big powers fight, then you are looking at the global insecurity at every step of the way. So reforms are a must, so that the other countries have a power. If they can disband completely with their veto, that will be a good thing. They can do in the Security Council on from the point of view of how many, let's say, majority votes on a resolution, then it will be implemented. But they would not give up. No country wants to give up veto. Secondly, they don't want other countries to have the veto also, even though they agree that India should be a member of the council. But at the same time, they're not willing to give the others this right. No, India did not delay taking action regarding evacuation. You know what happens is that in such situations which are evolving, the President Zelensky was saying himself that Russia will not intervene in this, and Americans and others were just hyping it up. President Putin was saying he will not attack Russia. So whatever be the assessment of the Indian government in that side, or our embassy in particular, which advises, and the international approaches that we get, what we did was we started telling people that please leave now, go to other neighboring countries, go to India, go to somewhere months before. But on an average, the students did not leave for the simple reason because they thought that their university people also believed their president. They said that nothing is going to happen, but if you go, you will lose your year. Now, no student wants to leave a year. So, a large number of them refused to leave. And then the war actually began. At that time, the panic set in. So, Indian government immediately started evacuation because see, we don't start something. There is a standard procedure. We have SOP, we have contingency plans, we have a war center in South Block, and all army, navy, everybody is part of it. And so we try every bit, whatever is possible, to evacuate every citizen wherever we can. But first, before the actual evacuation begins, you advise people to leave, and those people who left early. But some of them thought, or because embassy can issue an advisory, it cannot physically lift people and bring them. So I don't see that it was any delay in that. No, there is no delay. Well, the geoeconomics will change completely. And as I said, the new financial architecture will come out, new security architecture, and we might be seeing 2.0, Cold War. And so this will have a major impact, this war. The kind of sanctions that the Americans and the West have imposed are unprecedented this time. They will have an impact on Russia. But at the same time, today only I read that the Chinese and Russia have an arrangement, and they have doubled it, 100% they have increased it. So the trade will continue with China. Then Russia will start trading with Iran and violating all US sanctions wherever it is. So all sanctioned countries will come together and start trading with them. They're like, there is a SWIFT system. The Chinese have a system called CIPS, and the Russians also had developed another system which they used with different countries. So now they're going to club these systems. So you will have an alternate architecture. And it is not now. It has been happening for a while now. There is a BRICS Development Bank. There is Chinese Investment Bank. There are trade in barter trade in national currencies like UAE along with China, India with Russia. We all have worked arrangements in our own national currencies. So that's all going to be a part of the new architecture, so to say. Well, whether internal sovereignty to embassy, that has been there. That was the part of more autonomy to these two republics. That was part of the Minsk agreement, but the Ukrainian government didn't show much interest in it. So that is why the steps that Russia has taken, right or wrong, that can be discussed, but the taken is to protect these Russians there, who are there, thousands of them. 800,000 came to Russia before the invasion. So, well, there on diplomacy and foreign policy, there are plenty of books here. I mean, it's very difficult to say, but I can say there are so many books that have come. One has very recently come, and I'm not going to say because this has been written by 30 ambassadors, including one chapter from me by Investation. That is something that can give you a very good, and let me see, I'll show you what it is. This is the name of the book, India's Foreign Policy in the Post-COVID World Through the Eyes of Indian Diplomats. It's a good book, it just come. It's about 33 ambassadors who have written chapters on various dimensions of the foreign policy. And I would recommend that anybody who's wanting to have a little more studies can go through it. Well, India's, there are too many questions. I'll just read one and then finish off today. Then next time we can take them up. The one last
yes, sir, this will be the last question.
Yeah, the one question is that how has there been a policy shift in Indian IR approach in the last 5 years? See, I think that India has understood that it is a power, that it has a role, global role. It has always had a global role. but to be able to define that global role, to exert that global role is important. India's policy in a way was earlier, I would say, non-alignment to a great extent, passive sometimes. But what I see now is there is a greater focus on action-oriented foreign policy, result-oriented foreign policy, multi-alignments with the countries, dehyphenation of relationships. That is very important because, see, like earlier, Israel-Palestine, we were always stuck. If a minister goes to Palestine, he has to go to Israel. Israel, he goes to Palestine. That has been done. Saudi-Iran, we have dehyphenated our relationship. So these are certain changes, I believe. And then, of course, the projection of India's soft power diplomacy has been unprecedented this time. And India is recognized today. Every country wants to work with them. Our economy, and this is something we must learn. No, we have a huge market. We have a huge population. We have a huge consumer base. We are a strategically located country. We may have a good army or whatever it is. But at the same time, the key to everything is our economy. The more the economy grows, the greater your engagement with the world becomes, the stakeholding of the world into India becomes increasingly strong. That becomes your real strength subsequently. I would stop here today.
Thank you very much for your precious time, sir. It was a very enchanting session.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
All the best.